Welcome to Chapter 1, the Introduction to Biology. This chapter is going to outline a lot of concepts that we're going to touch upon multiple times throughout the semester. So don't feel like once we talk about them, that's it. No, we're gonna repeat these things a bunch. It's going to be a kind of a wax on, wax off approach to learning about science and biology. So let's get started, and first let's talk about what life is. How do we define life? What makes a living thing, a living organism? There's a lot of different ways that we've described life before, and we're going to use a few characteristics. You might be able to find other characteristics, and kind of the fundamental reason why it's so difficult to nail down exactly what life is that life is very diverse. It has a lot of different characteristics, and there's some gray areas even when you talk about things like viruses. So let's get into some of these characteristics and get some examples going. The first characteristic of life is that life is organized. Atoms make up molecules, molecules make up cells, those cells make tissues, and it continues. As an example of that, let's look at this plant, Arabidopsis thaliana. We'll just look at a kind of microscopic view of its cells, and you can see that in these cells there's even smaller units called organelles. So the cell is made up of organelles, and then it's embedded within a matrix of other cells, and you can see those other cells are all around it. Well, all these cells together make up a tissue, and those tissues sometimes make up structures. Now you can see in the center we have a bunch of cells making up a tissue, which is making up a structure called a root. And the root system on a plant is actually an organ. So here you can see kind of three levels of structures going on at one time. And finally, all of the organs together make up the organism. Here you can see the shoot system of Arabidopsis thaliana on the far right. And that again is comprised of tissues, which are made of cells, which have organelles, which are made of molecules, which are made of atoms. This pattern of structures making larger structures, which make larger structures, continues on. Let's follow this flow chart, and we'll follow it backwards. And we're starting on the bottom left at number 10. Again, molecules and atoms make up things like DNA. And these structures then, in turn, make up organelles, which are kind of analogous to organs, but for the individual cell. Those organelles are inside the cell and help the cell fulfill its metabolic processes. Those cells together make up tissues. Those tissues make organs, and those organs make up organ systems. So you can think of the cardiovascular organ system is made up of several organs like the heart. All of the organs and organ systems working together make up a complete organism. So in this case, the example organism is this marine iguana. Remember that this marine iguana is composed of organ systems and organs made up of tissues, made up of cells, which are made up of organelles, and ultimately molecules and atoms. Several organisms or multiple organisms in a breeding group, well, we call that a population. If you have several different populations of organisms interacting in a space, we call that a community. And several communities together make up what we call an ecosystem. Now, if we look at all of the ecosystems on Earth together as a whole, well, we call that the biosphere. Let's look at the way that life is organized from a large scale and kind of zoom in and see just how small or how much smaller of a unit we can get to using something like Google Maps. Here I'm on Google Maps, and you can see that we're here in the Bay Area. I've got a bunch of stuff saved all over the place. But I'm zoomed out, and you can see that this is the whole biosphere. There's a bunch of different habitats. You can see there's ice habitats, there's tundra habitats up here. They're very cold a lot of times, a lot of parts of the year. There's these taiga forests up in the north, and there's also these dry areas, these massive deserts. So we can already see that this larger biosphere is made up of these smaller units, these smaller ecosystems that are spread all across the globe. Now let's zoom in and see if we can't see something smaller. Now even on this scale, you can see that the Amazon River goes through this tropical rainforest habitat, this wet forest habitat. And we can see that the Amazon River is flanked by a bunch of green. Now that green is the product of an organism. So we can already see that this ecosystem is made of populations. We'll say these are populations of trees, and those trees are organisms. So we can already see 3 or 4 levels down on the structure. Now, what do you think those leaves, and we're just going to zoom in on the Amazon River here and try to see some up close trees. What do you think that tree's leaf is? Is that an organism? Well, no, it's part of that broader organism. Well, the leaf is part of a shoot system, which is actually an organ. So we're actually seeing in this forest, we're seeing the surfaces of organs that are part of organisms, which are the trees, that are making up populations of trees and a bunch of different species of trees together. It's making this whole community, this whole ecosystem, and this ecosystem is fitting into several other ecosystems around as the conditions change. And finally, all together, they make up a biosphere. So you can see that it's kind of a continuous flow here. The biosphere is made of ecosystems, which is made of communities, which is made of populations, which is made of organisms. And you can really stop at any one of these points and explore scientifically the different structures and components and processes that contribute to these stages. So you might be a scientist that really focuses on DNA, which would be number 10 in this flow chart. Or you might be a scientist that really focuses on tissues and the interactions of different tissues within the body. Or you might be an ecologist that looks at animals on a population and community level. So there's a lot to look at, but all in all, the pattern here is that there's a lot of different organization happening